This hour, we've been talking about the U.S. Secretary of State's latest push to secure a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war. In comments today, Antony Blinken saying it is up to Hamas here to create concrete actions toward a truce. This comes on the heels of the UN Security Council's approval of a U.S.-backed plan to end the war. And in a statement released a short time ago, Israel indicating Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu appears poised to formally accept that plan, which he, of course, has avoided doing in the past. So that, again, begs the question of whether Hamas will accept that plan. The Wall Street Journal reporting that Hamas's military leader is pleased with the progress of the war, saying Hamas has the upper hand in his view and that the civilian casualties seen in Gaza, tens of thousands of them, are, quote, necessary sacrifices. Greg Carlstrom reports on the Middle East for The Economy and is joining us from Dubai. Greg, it's good to have you with me. I just want to start off with where we stand at this hour. So we know there have been more conversations. Antony Blinken, of course, I believe is in Jordan at the moment. This new statement from Israel, a little bit more public in terms of where the government could go. Do you believe that changes anything?
A little bit more public, but I think there are still a couple of big questions. One of them is if Hamas does agree to this, if the leadership inside of Gaza does agree to this deal, will the Israeli cabinet then vote in favor of this? Benjamin Netanyahu has to bring it before his right-wing coalition partners and get the cabinet on board. But before it gets to that point, I think we have the same question that we've had for months now in these ceasefire talks, which is this issue of whether or not Hamas will go for a deal that may not turn into a permanent ceasefire. The UN Security Council, in its resolution last night, sort of trying to fudge that issue. The ceasefire agreement itself also fudges that issue, and that is still holding up these talks, I think, as it has for the better part of this year now.
In terms of Hamas, the Wall Street Journal reporting on messages reportedly from Yahya Sinwar, talking about the fact that, in his view, they've got Israel, right where we want them, and even touching on what were referred to in these messages as, quote, necessary casualties. That gives everyone perhaps a little bit more insight into where things stand. May also give some folks pause in terms of whether Hamas may be willing to move forward.
And I think those comments are consistent with what people have been saying about Sinwar's views for months, and also what people who knew him in years past before October 7th, what they said about his personality. This is someone who does think he has a long-term strategy against Israel, that he's playing a longer game and that he's winning that longer game. And so not surprising that he would make those kinds of comments. There's a real disagreement, I think, within Hamas at this point. There are some people within the organization who would be willing to go for a ceasefire right now, who think the level of destruction in Gaza not just is, of course, horrible for Palestinians in Gaza, but they think it's bad for Hamas as a movement, that it's doing damage to their popularity in Gaza, it's doing damage to them as a political movement and a military force. So that is a view that some people within the organization are pushing. The problem is they're not the people who actually matter when it comes to implementing a ceasefire. That comes down to really one man inside of Gaza. And then I do think that these leaked comments in the Wall Street Journal, they do reflect his view of the conflict.
I was struck some of those elite comments, too. Sinwar saying things went out of control in one of those messages, referring to the attacks on October 7th, the terror attack. People got caught up in it, referring to some of the gangs taking civilian women and children as hostages. The fact that he may see this as getting out of control, what does that say about the amount of control that Sinwar has over Hamas?
Well, and we don't know, we should say, we've heard these kinds of comments. I mean, I've heard them personally from other officials at Hamas over the past 8 months, and we don't know the extent to which these comments are accurate or true, or to what extent they're sort of retroactively trying to distance themselves from some of the things that took place on October 7th. But I think on the part of Sinwar, it speaks to maybe a broader miscalculation that he has been making for a while now, not just with what was going to happen on October 7th, but also what the reaction was going to be. The Journal reported, and I've heard as well from people in Hamas, that they were surprised after October 7th that they didn't receive more support from Hezbollah in Lebanon, from Iran and other Iranian proxies in the region. They thought there was going to be sort of full-throated support from the other members of the so-called Axis of Resistance, and they didn't receive that. So I think there were a lot of miscalculations, a lot of erroneous thinking that went on in the days both before and after October 7th.
I also want to get your take on where things stand in Israel. You know, you have a great piece going into this, not only the background of Benny Gantz, but but the decision as well to step down, of course, from the war cabinet. You know, and one of the things you pointed out is in his press conference, he said it's a crucial strategic decisions that are being blocked by both hesitation and political considerations. You know, referencing clearly Benjamin Netanyahu there. How does his stepping down from the war cabinet, one of two people obviously who are leaving, how does that impact this move heading forward and potentially these negotiations?
I think it puts Netanyahu in a very difficult position. Now, Gantz had hoped to, as you say, to unlock some of these longer term strategic conversations about what Gaza is going to look like after the war, who's going to govern Gaza, how to avoid a protracted Israeli military occupation of Gaza. And he didn't succeed in pushing Netanyahu to talk about any of those things. And that's why he went ahead and left the war cabinet. But by doing that, he deprives Netanyahu now of sort of a centrist fig leaf, which is something that Netanyahu has always liked having in his governments. He has to contend with politicians who are on his right, and he always likes having someone to his left, someone from the center, to balance his far-right coalition partners. That's been true over the past 8 months. That's been true of many of his governments over the past 15 years. He doesn't have that balance anymore. And so when Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich and the far-right members of his coalition, when they push him not to accept the ceasefire deal, when they push him to continue the war, when they push him perhaps for more action in the north on the border with Lebanon, he doesn't have centrist figures anymore in the war cabinet to use as a foil and to try to push back on those demands from the right.
Greg Carlstrom, so great to have you with us this morning. Appreciate your expertise and your insight. Thank you.